Joining me on the Fear the Fro podcast today after the wake of the Cavaliers selecting yet another player below 6'6", Meleek Thomas, guard out of Arkansas, a man who's been on the podcast before his second appearance, Cooper Klein of the Upside Swings podcast. You can find them on YouTube. They do extensive coverage year-round on all of the various draft prospects running up. They have one on Meleek Thomas that's recent. It's dropped within the last week or so. So, Cooper, thank you for taking the time to join me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Always happy to talk Cavs. Especially now that you guys have James Harden, I feel like I'm a secondary fan.
Yes, because for those who don't know, you are a Houston fan, correct?
Yeah. I had to deal with us drafting Bruce Thornton.
So don't say that with this audience. You say you have to deal with it. That you should be honored to have Bruce Thornton on your team. If you're going to alienate a lot of Cav fans immediately, if you denigrate Bruce Thornton. But yeah, we can get around to that. We'll do that. We'll bury that at the end when people have already punched out. If you have not great feelings about that. So let's start with kind of what the Cavs did and your assessment. First thing I want to kind of set a backdrop for is, one of the things I enjoy about your podcast is I feel like more often than not, I don't feel like you guys, and I don't mean this as a disrespect to anybody else in the draft space, but I truly, when I listen to your podcast, I feel like I can tell with 100% certainty that these are your own opinions formulated from your own viewing, and that it's not always in lockstep with all the other stuff that you see out there. Like guys like me, I am heavily influenced by what other people who are actually covering the draft and doing this year-round are doing. With you guys, I always feel confident that it comes from a place of witnessing it. So I wanted to bring you on to just kind of talk about, I think a good place to start is with the guy that the Cavaliers actually selected in Meleek Thomas. Can you tell me a little bit about your experiences scouting him, what you've taken away, your feelings on the prospect and the player?
Yeah, so Meleek is his talent is that he's a shooter. He's a shot maker, right? This guy can hit crazy shots off the dribble. He's got pretty good size, decent athleticism, but this is like a true talented shot maker, right? Like, especially for his age, right? Like he is a freshman, only going to be 20. It'll be his age 20 season. So he's pretty young, right? There's not very many truly young players who are like selectable in the second round. That kind of like the Trevor Keels of the world, the early second rounder young players, those players have really just fallen out of the draft with NIL. So I do think that as much as I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but even if you don't love the process of, hey, let's take a guy who doesn't exactly fit a need, you are getting like a true young development project that I don't think that the Cavs have taken in a while. And you can always you can always use more shooting, right? In this league, you can always use another bet at a guy who can create his own shot and who can get out there and maybe get you a few buckets in the playoffs, right? I think Bryce, my co-host, he loves the jumper, right? I'm not as much of a jumper evaluator. I'm not as good at that kind of thing, but this is a truly talented shooter. And if you're going to get that kind of guy at like 35, that's, in my opinion, always a good swing to take, even if it's not the best fit or, he doesn't have the best surrounding skill sets in other ways.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit in the context of the Cavs, right? Because I made it pretty clear what my preferences were at the end of the first round and even after we traded back. I've spent the better part of the last day saying, okay, I'm going to withhold judgment on trading out at 29. I want to see what they land at 34. But my feeling is you're looking at a roster that is loaded in the backcourt. I mean, they've spent in excess of 130 mil on the backcourt. They have far less than that tied up in the front court. They effectively have Dean Wade as a big wing, Max Strus, who sometimes slides over to the floor, and then you have Mobley and Jared Allen. But in the backcourt, you have, Strus, you have Sam Merrill, you have Jalen Tyson, you have James Harden, you have Donovan Mitchell. It did not seem like an immediate need. Now, that being said, I did like Meleek Thomas. I liked Evans in the sense that both those guys, Evans more so in motion, felt like a guy who could catch the ball on the move and knock down shots in a way that's reminiscent of a Merrill or a Max Strus. Just the shot making profile of Meleek, though, I think what appealed to me about him is while this isn't necessarily the way that I would have gone, when you look at the Cavs roster, they have two very isolation heavy players in Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. And what I like about Thomas is one, he's bigger than most of our perimeter guys. He has a reasonable wingspan at 6'7" or so. While people don't position him as some kind of lockdown defender, everybody describes him as an active, engaged defender who, fights through screens, who does those types of things that at least as he puts on weight, I mean, he's about 190 right now, but as he maybe gets a little bit bigger and able to deal with NBA contact, it at least seems like it can profile as sort of a two-way, very capable defensive player who, while it seems like most of his formative years were spent with the ball in his hands, including the time that he was with Overtime Elite, in coming in and playing alongside an Acuff, I think what I like about that, or what gives me some optimism here, is that heading into an off-season cycle where the Cavs are probably / almost certainly going to lose Keon Ellis, they could bring in a guy on a rookie contract who has played with the ball in his hands, but has thrived with the ball out of his hands, which is something that absolutely has to happen in an ecosystem where you have two such high-usage ball handlers as a Donovan Mitchell and a James Harden. Can you talk a little bit about what he was prior to coming to Arkansas and playing with Acuff, and the way that his game has changed when he was dropped into an environment with a true alpha high usage player like a Darius Acuff?
Yeah, I mean, in OTE, you get to just take all the shots you want in the world. You get to get your hang, your tween, hezzy pulls, your hang, side steps, whatever. You get to get into your bag. And then in Arkansas, you definitely see him kind of lean more into this spacing role where he's the second guy, right? Acuff is the guy at Arkansas. But I mean, you can see 22 usage for Meleek Thomas. He's still getting his, and there's still definitely possessions where Arkansas's entire offense breaks down and he's still able to break the glass in case of emergency, go out, get you a bucket or two. And then, there's still his possessions. He gets his upper pick and roll reps and he gets to get into his game. But he really was able to kind of slide back into a smaller role, space the floor well. I think over the course of the season, he got better as an off-ball shooter. You could tell that it's a new role for him, right? Like you could see that he was kind of uncomfortable with it, but he did kind of begin to start moving and shifting, to get his creator better angles for passing, to get himself more open as the year went on. And, I don't think that you are taking him to be like a full-time creator bet. But if he can further develop as this off-ball player, I think that is easier to do. It's easier to scale back into that role than it is to do the opposite and to take the next step at the NBA level. So I do have some hope for him.
I have hope in that regard too, in the sense that there was positives and negatives of what I was hearing. The first thing that I kind of felt good about was, okay, the areas where he proved to be most efficient, the stuff that he was in the upper percentiles, a lot of it proved to be those quick decisions, pull up threes, stuff where he didn't overthink it, stuff where he didn't pound the rock over dribble. But the criticisms a lot of times were the exact opposite of that. They were, okay, this is a guy who, because he's shown he's capable of it on lower levels, perhaps he tries to do it too much in the environment that he was in. And one particularly damning stat that I had seen was 93rd percentile in isolation frequency, 23rd percentile in isolation scoring efficiency. Is that something that you think, do you believe he has, because everything I've seen is not that he's some elite athlete. Do you think that that's something that grew over the course of the year? Or do you think something, from what I saw with his late surge at the end of this season, it seemed like a lot of that was getting weeded out of his shot profile, and he was shifting more to the kind of archetype that we would expect him to be on the NBA level?
I think a lot of that also had to do with Acuff's kind of, I don't want to say arrival. That's the wrong word because he was always the guy there, but Arkansas needed some time to find their identity. And it started really, really everyone ISO heavy. Let's everyone get their own turn. Eventually they realize, let's just let A-Cup get us into our stuff. And then everyone else can kind of play around him. And I do think that, like, as much as it's like, oh, he did isolate a lot. He was doing a lot of this stuff. I don't think you come out to the draft with the understanding that, like, I could be a second round pick. I'm probably going to be a second round pick. If you're not willing to continue to be realistic about the situation you're in and continue to scale back your role, right? And I do think that, like, that's the kind of thing with a guy like Thomas. He only stays in this draft if teams are like, you're talented, we want you to be a shooter, please come here and just shoot, we're done with the ISO stuff, right? Like, you don't get drafted this high as this kind of, like, slightly inefficient, kind of raw player without that kind of promise, especially in the NIL era when he could have gone back and gotten way more money, right? So I think that says a lot about who he is as a person, as a player. And I'm very hopeful you've seen the development over the course of the year, and I think he'll continue to be able to develop in that way.
Now, in terms of pure shooters in this draft, who were the prospects that jumped out to you as guys that you thought were on his level or above his level?
That is a tough question. I think Isaiah Evans was up there. I really liked Evans as an off-ball, like, true wing-sized shooter. Keaton Wagler, obviously, very high-level shooter. I do think he's in that, like, kind of that level as a shot maker, right? I do think Wagler is probably the best in the class, and maybe he's a step or two below that. But in the Isaiah Evans, Braden Smith, Emmanuel Sharp, kind of level where it's like, this guy could be one of the premier shooters in the league, but he's not this can't miss shooter, right? In the way Wagler is. There's no way he doesn't shoot, at least in the league, right? He took so many buried ones. There's a world where Meleek Thomas is just like an okay shooter, but he's got the talent to be a top 20 shooter in the NBA if everything really clicks and the work ethic is, there for him to continue developing.
Well, the other thing I wanted to talk more about was the other side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, because I think one of the things that Cavs fans would tell you, especially coming off of this postseason, is that we have loaded up on shooting or shooting capable players. And, Max Strus, Sam Merrill, Jalen Tyson, a top 5 3-point shooter in the NBA this year. And a lot of times that hasn't been complemented on the other side of the ball, or the defense hasn't necessarily held up in the playoffs. We got lit up by the Pacers a year ago. You go into this Knicks series, there was just too many blown defensive assignments, some of those falling at James Harden's footsteps in the Eastern Conference Finals. But he's obviously not a guy who's not going to be on the court. So if you had to look at Meleek Thomas relative to, the guys that the Cavs have in the system, do you anticipate him being able to crack the rotation in Cleveland, or is this a guy who's really only probably going to find his way to the floor if there's departures of some of the guys? Like, where would you stack up in terms of how you felt about him as a prospect versus some of these other fringe guys who are sitting ahead of him in the rotation right now? Craig Porter Jr., Tyrese Proctor from last year. There's a lot of people feel he's got a very promising future. Do you expect Meleek Thomas to just spend the majority of the time in the G League this season, or is this a guy who you think could surprise and find his way into the rotations sooner rather than later?
I think he could be a regular season minutes guy if, a Sam Merrill gets hurt. But defensively, this isn't a guy who's playing his way on the court, like, immediately at all. He tries, but he's skinny and under athletic. And that's a really difficult combination, especially if you're a wing, right? Like, you can kind of get away with that if you're a guard, I can go guard the second best guy. But Meleek Thomas isn't good enough yet to be like, I'm comfortable stashing this guy on a corner shooter. Like, we can bring him on the floor and stash him. If you're going to be a role player, you've got to bring more value than that. And I think he's got the potential. He's long, he's tall. Yeah, I do think he's athletic enough to be a wing. He's like just below like average for, NBA wings. But this, like, I don't think there's a world where he's more of a more ready rotation player than Craig Porter Jr. next year.
Yeah, that's understandable. I think my thinking is, seeing this draft pick, the first thing I thought was, well, Keon Ellis is probably gone. Not because this guy's ready to usurp Keon Ellis's skills and talents, but the Cavs just have too much committed to the backcourt that I don't know how they can keep spending money on guys who can't crack, 10, 15 minutes in the regular season even. You can't commit $10 million to a guy. And they made this mistake with Isaac Okoro. They gave him $11 million and then his minutes regressed the next season. And I think in a backcourt that crowded, that's exactly the type of situation that may have compelled them to take him, because I think they see the writing on the wall and realize, okay, Keon Ellis's market is going to exceed what we're capable of giving him. And, let's just get a guy into the developmental system and see where we go from there. And we're taping this in the middle of the second round. So for all I know, there were other names linked to the Cavs. I did want to touch on some of those. One in particular, and I should pull this up and see if he's even been drafted yet. But the Cavs were tied to a handful of people. One that came up was Nick Martinelli at Northwestern. Now, as far we're at about pick 52 at the time we're taping this, which was, I believe, the Cavs pick had they not conveyed it to the Clippers in the Darius Garland trade. But did you do any time scouting him? Because there's a part of me that wonders if we're not going to see a similar outcome to, say, like a Proctor, where he uses his agent to kind of maneuver his way into a situation where, if you're not going to promise me a two-way, don't draft me, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of an outcome that I would love to see, just to get another prospect in there, because I think this is the other crossroads the Cavs are at. They have done very good. They have not done good in late first-round picks. Like, looking at pick 20 and beyond, you've got Amani Bates. He didn't pan out. You got Jalen Tyson. He has broken out. But in general, this is not a Cavs team that's killed it in that section of the draft. Where they have succeeded is identifying these undrafted free agents and bringing them into the system. And when I saw all the news creeping out there from Fedor and some of the other Cavs beat writers about how much they like Nick Martinelli in some of these workouts, I can't help but wonder if this is a guy who could find his way into the system if he goes undrafted. Now, by the time you're listening to this podcast, this may be entirely irrelevant, but I did want to kind of get your thoughts on him as a prospect.
He is he's a worse shooter. And I think my thing with Martinelli is he's a 6'6" center in college. And I think that means that he's got the toughness to like guard guys bigger than him. And that's like really good for like, could you be backup Dean Wade light, because he's kind of tough and kind of shooty.
Kind of Midwestern whitey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fits right in. He's not my favorite just because he really didn't break out until this year, right? And if you're that old, I kind of want to see you like truly dominate and truly be really good until this point. But in undrafted free agency, if you can take a swing on a 6'6" guy who can shoot and is maybe kind of tough and can kind of defend, like, go for it. I think the swing on a draftable talent in Meleek is far more important. But those are the kind of guys that you take undrafted free agency swings on. Those are the guys you have to hit on. You have to hit on these tougher. They can at least do one thing that they might be good enough to see the floor in the NBA by doing. And in undrafted free agency, what's the downside?
Well, as you were giving that monologue, Henry Besar went to the Clippers. So they got Baba Miller and Henry Besar, two guys who I think Cavs fans were perhaps interested in at the pick where they took Meleek Thomas. I wanted to talk about the two bigs that we didn't take, in part because anybody who follows me on Twitter at Fear the Fro knows my preference at that pick was to either come away with Trayvon Brazile or Henry Besar. Now, Brazile went one pick after Meleek Thomas, two guys from the same team. I'm curious what your thoughts were about him as a prospect. We don't have to dwell on it, but just a general idea of what, if you think his game will translate to the NBA and how you felt about him.
At the end of the day, he's 6'10" and bouncy and can shoot, right? And that's kind of like, it's worth the swing. But it's the same kind of thing with Martinelli, where it's like you're a 4th or 5th year college player and you're not. I think he was a 6th year college player because he missed a year, and like with an injury, and it's like you're just not dominating. Like, why were you not the best player on this Arkansas team? You were the best athlete in the SEC. What there's It's really a hard sell to like be like he didn't really ever get that much better. But if you can just bring him into the NBA, stick him in the corner, maybe he adds some value. But I think secretly there's a lot of guys who can be 6'10" and pretend to shoot. I don't think Brazil's a particularly skilled shooter enough to be like, I'm going to add value in that way. And he doesn't do a ton else to like really kind of up his value. If he had come out a few years ago and this was like who he was as a sophomore, oh my God, like bring him in now. But he's like 23 at this point, and it's a lot harder to be in on that guy.
Have you felt different in this NIL era in terms of how people feel about older prospects? Because now, like take a guy like Momcilovic. He was somebody who I was like, ooh, he might last till deep in the, first round, elite shooter. He's got some size, and then he goes back. It makes me wonder, though, in the past, and I remember this vividly from the Okoro draft where, Obi Toppin was a phenomenal college player, but people did not want to take him because of his age. In this NIL era, there's these guys who probably could get drafted who are just making financial decisions. Do you think it's diluted the aversion, I should say, to drafting these older prospects? And when you look at older prospects now, do you come in as frequently with that idea that like, well, if this guy legitimately had it, why wouldn't he have left after sophomore year? Or do you just say, well, this is a dollars and cents decision, and maybe older guys will profile more as we go along?
Yeah, I think it's really dropped the bottom out of the middle class of the NBA draft, right? If you are on the fence, would you rather go get if you're projected to go from 20 to 40, that's a huge range. Being the 20th pick is super cool. Being the 40th pick on the second day of the draft, that sucks. Like, imagine you went to the green room and then you got to sit there all night. You don't get drafted. It's hard. And then you got to go be a second round pick, get way less money, or you could just go back to school, get a couple $1,000,000, or even just like a couple 100,000, and it's guaranteed. You know what your life's like, and you can come out and be a better player in a few years and still get the chance to go in that 20 to 40 range, right? And that's why I talk a lot about, like, if you're an older player, you need to dominate. Like, you need to be Yaxel Lendeborg dominating, being the second best player in college basketball to be like, this is a worthy draft pick at this slot, right? And, that's why you see guys like Ejiofor. It's like, in what other world are we seeing a guy who's like 22 or 23, undersized center, getting drafted at like 23 or wherever he went yesterday to the Hawks? And it's because there's literally no one else, and you might as well take your favorite older guy who you project to be the best, right? And Ejiofor like dominated, and he got way better, and that's like really important, right? You still want to see these guys get better and not just plateau and stick and just be who they are when they go back to college.
Cooper, I like that answer. Makes me feel a little bit better. The way that you described Ejiofor and in this range, because here's the thing. I saw a lot of aggressive calls for Kobe's head when he traded back out of the first round. And it got me thinking about, okay, how many times in Cavs history have we seen these types of things where the Cavs, they trade out and they end up giving away somebody late in the first round, pick 20 or on, who ends up to, going on to make a difference. And there really has not been many stories of that. But then I decided, you know what? I want to look back over all the drafts since, Kobe Altman took over, which was 2017, to see, okay, how many times has this really burned a squad? Because the Cavs swapped out of the Caravan pick. They moved back about, 4 or 5 slots, and they get Meleek Thomas. And I think, obviously there's no way to know, but there's a very good chance that you could be looking back a few years from now and say, well, that was a no-brainer. There was no reason not to do that. Meleek Thomas could absolutely prove to be a better prospect than Caravan. Just in recent history, last year you had Derek Queen. They traded, proved to be like Kingston Flemings this year, along with Asa Newell, in order to select Derek Queen. Now that we know the conveyance on that pick, the move back to 23 to take Newell, and they gave an unprotected 2026 first that turned out to be Kingston Flemings. Now you're a Houston fan, so I'm going to presume you've seen a lot of him. How do you feel about that trade in hindsight?
I feel a lot worse about it kind of sucks that they only got Asa Newell for Derek Queen, but then you get Kingston Flemings, who I had as the same tier of prospect as Derek Queen, and I think he's a better fit for what they want to do. They need a tough, real half court setter who can play at the guard spot. And I do think Derek Queen could have given them that, but also then I think you're blanketing guys like Jalen Johnson, and there's some goofy fits there for them. And I think Flemings is a much cleaner fit with what they want to do. Just like very easy win. Even if you are the world's biggest Derek Queen fan, and I think I might have been. I had him at 2 last season.
Oh wow!
I love Derek Queen. I think he's going to be incredible. Maybe should have had him below Khan, but those two at my 2 and 3, I feel great about. But you can't be giving up an unprotected pick when you're this bad of a team, and Kingston is going to be really, really good for the Hawks. I'm really excited for them.
Yeah, I like Kingston. I read that Players Tribune piece about him getting run over, and I just kind of like him. There's something when I watch his game, I feel like, and I said this on the previous pod, I feel like sometimes I see that Darius Garland jitter a little bit, where I just like how much he was able to create for himself without needing screens. And amongst that group of guards that all went in that range, he may not prove to be the best, but he's my favorite of those prospects in watching it. And speaking of, the New Orleans trades, another example, Zaire Williams, selected number 10. He was traded for what amounted to Trey Murphy III, Jonas Valanciunas, and Brandon Boston. So another one, Walker Kessler, picked at number 22. He was acquired in a trade with the 19th pick that was Jake LaRavia. So there are examples, but I've given you just a handful. In general, the majority of the time, the trades that happen in this range just simply do not matter. And I'm not going to, force this all upon Cooper. We're not going to talk about this endlessly. But I did want to talk about, because, I mentioned just a moment ago that Henry Vesar was a guy who was very popular for the Cavs as we sat here between round 1 and round 2, and we looked at who could be a big, who they could bring in, who could play alongside a Mobley or a Jared Allen, who is more capable of spacing the floor. He slid mightily to the point where he was selected by the Clippers with the draft pick that the Cavs gave to them in the Darius Garland trade. How do you feel about him as a prospect? And if you had to assess why he fell so much, what would be your suspicion as to why he was available so late in the second round?
You said Vesar, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I spaced for a moment. I think you watch his tape and he's 7 feet tall and he is just not dominant defensively. I think he only had a 4 block rate as a 7-footer. And as soon as Caleb Wilson goes down, UNC really struggled on the interior. He kind of keeps guys out of there. He keeps them from driving. They're not as comfortable, but if you're 7 feet tall playing college basketball, especially in the ACC, especially as a junior or senior and upperclassman like he was, why are you not blocking more shots? Why are you not locking down the paint? You have to be held to a higher standard. And also his whole thing is he's a stretch big, right? That's kind of the sell for him offensively. He's got a little bit of a handle, but he didn't take that many threes, right? He's not this guy is 100% going to shoot. I was talking a bit about fake shooters or guys who can be, pretend to be shooters. And I do think that he fits that criteria. And the NBA has just really kind of gotten into lockstep on if you're not going to overwhelm defensively or shoot or be an elite finisher at 7 feet tall, why am I bringing you in just to be 7 feet tall? And I think that that's kind of the thing with Vesar.
I think that's fair. I think the reason there was so much appeal in Cavs communities is because you have Allen and Mobley behind him on the back line. Nobody was necessarily looking for him to be a rim protector. What the Cavs have been in desperate need of is, size, who can play the 4, the 3. I mean, ideally, you would want somebody in that range who could replace much of what Dean Wade does, which is good point of attack defense, can wall up against these big wings when they get momentum going to the rim. And I don't know that that prospect necessarily existed, but was there anybody in the late part of the first round, all the way through the second round, who, if you were saying, well, this is a guy developmentally, I would love to get into the system, who could be that kind of big wing defender, doesn't have to offer much offensively, but ideally a little bit of versatility to be able to play against size, but also fast enough laterally to guard against some of these mobile elite wings on the NBA level? Were there prospects that jumped out to you that fit that mold?
Once you get outside of the first round, no, those guys don't exist. I actually, before he went back to school, I thought a guy like Tunde Yasufu was interesting entirely because there's a world where you bring him in and he can do that job, right? Like he has value specifically only because of that. I think like the closest thing to like a swing at that would have been Kareem Lopez, who went to Memphis at like 21 or something like that. 6'8", 6'9", or he's like almost legit 6'10". So he's 6'9". He played in the NBL. He's really tough. We just talked about him yesterday on our live stream that we did, wrapping up all the players that we had scouted that we hadn't gotten to. But he's just like athletic enough. He can slide his feet enough. He's got good feel, a pretty decent motor. Like, and at the end of the day, he's 6'10" and can play, right? And guys like that are desperately needed in the NBA. So I think he's the closest thing to that. Honestly, someone who was not a forward, but who I think could have done, who I think actually got drafted super high because of that, is Merez Johnson, right? Like he goes to Dallas at 9. Crazy pick, by the way. That was awesome. I really love that pick. But like his whole thing is like, I'm 6'9" and can pretend to protect the rim and also can slide with these guys a little bit on the perimeter. The last guy who I would say kind of could maybe do that is Terrace Reed, a little bit of an undersized center. But I think that that's kind of the guy who, if you're going for like a budget guy to go and guard these bigger wings, it's like, go get an undersized center. Why would the Cavs sign Xavier Tillman? What's he been doing all this time? Like go find him, bring in these undersized centers who can guard some slower threes, right? And then you get kind of a, that's probably your best shot at a makeshift big wing guarder that's not going to go like top 10 in the draft.
How did you feel about Koa Pete?
Not very good.
Okay. Well, tell me on that, because this will make Cavs fans feel better, because they look at him and they see somebody who looks like a physical marvel. Definitely probably slots in that power forward position to small forward position. And while he didn't necessarily, everybody knew about the shortcomings of his shot, but being that he's so young, there's always a sales pitch of like, well, he's an unknown. I mean, same thing with Senek Jr. There's a lot of people, I think those guys got described similarly, and you being in Houston, you would know, as guys who came in with a ton of hype and didn't necessarily deliver in their freshman year to the level that people expected. What is your confidence that those guys, and I hope for Senek Jr. it's also negative, being that he landed in Boston. What is your confidence that those guys will live up to the potential that maybe they didn't on a collegiate level?
Well, it's kind of low in both, right? I will say, Cavs fans, you should feel better about that. Senek himself, extremely raw. I watched almost every Senek game. He's a mess. He's multiple years away from being multiple years away. Koa specifically, he's the same kind of sell as Yusufu, where it's like the whole sell is that he is potentially someone who is 6'8" and is kind of strong and can kind of guard in isolation. But he's not like a good isolation defender at this point. And he's also not good in help. And he's also kind of low-key under athletic. And the motor also doesn't really run as hot, right? Like there's a lot of, he's just not all the way there. to where you're questioning a lot of the base skills. You know, the finishing is up and down. The mid-range shooting is awful. His process as a mid-range shooter, like we talked about it in our pod on him, but like Arizona as a scheme just kind of wanted him to get shots on the glass because they could out rebound every team in college basketball because they're huge. That's not an excuse to shoot so poorly. And even going back to high school, like he wasn't a good mid-range shooter. It was just like he's like got a star upside because he kind of takes them. But I don't know. I really don't ever feel too bad about missing out on low motor, low feel players, right? Those are like the two things for me that indicate a player's ceiling. Even if you're bad, if you try really hard and you know how to play basketball, I'm pretty confident that you're going to get better and better and better and better. And I don't think either of those guys are either of those things.
Now, you talked about Terrace Reed Jr. That is a team that I wanted to touch on because I think one of the shocks of the first round for me was what the San Antonio Spurs did. Now, we were drafting in their slot due to that convoluted DeAndre Hunter trade, but they ended up drafting two centers, Jaden Quaintance, who spent the last year at Kentucky, and then Terrace Reed. Now, Quaintance, in the aftermath of the draft, they've announced that he's going to get another procedure on his knee. So it sounds like it's kind of going to be a redshirt rookie season for him anyway. What did you think when you saw them double dip on first round bigs?
You know what? If you really think you need bigs so bad, go for it. Right? Like Quaintance he's a luxury pick for them, right? Like you already have the best defensive center in basketball. Go draft the guy who could be the second best defensive center in basketball if he's healthy. Like you have the excess picks. If you can pair them in the same front court and like basically kind of do like a Cavs thing where you have JD Quaintance as your 5 and then Wemby as your 4 as a helper, like in a Mobley role. I think the league's just done at that point, right? Like we've seen this with Giannis and Brook Lopez, like except now you have a more scheme versatile Brook Lopez who can also play at the level and trap and hedge and do all this stuff. That's if he's healthy, right? I'm not one to comment on health. I don't have intel on it, but you see how many injuries he's had in the same leg, how many times it's had to get repaired at such a young age. We've seen crazier things happen, like Michael Porter Jr. wears a little thing on his foot and now he's never hurt ever in his life, I guess. But it's always scary to see that kind of thing, especially for a guy who really relies on his athleticism. Quaintance is, yeah.
This will age me a bit, but he reminds me of Nerlens Noel a little bit and how he's talking about. In the sense that, you watched his tape, like you watch Quaintance's tape and you're like, oh my God, this guy could be a world record on defense. But then you wonder, okay, is he so raw offensively that it's going to prove to be a liability to the point where it cancels out a lot of those advantages? And the health is just kind of an unknown. And maybe that's an easy comp because of the Kentucky connection and all that. But I will say, I found when you jump into this process late and it's a guy who played so little, I, of course, didn't even see him on the court this season. I remember him a little bit from Arizona State, but he was one of those guys that I was like, well, this is super high ceiling, super low floor. But then to see them double down, I'm like, man, I don't know. I love it. I was frustrated as a Cavs fan who kind of hoped that Terrace would last till the Cavs pick, but I love that approach of the other team in the West that I wanted to touch on a little bit was Oklahoma City, because they take a Daimara. And again, you have Chet Holmgren and him. You've got these two teams that conceivably will be battling for the next several years. What was your thought about how they approached the draft? Because this is a team that's done well at the top. They've absolutely dominated in the middle range of the draft in terms of finding talent. Kason Wallace, I think, went at 10. There's, Jalen Williams, Isaiah Joe obviously was not drafted by them, but a guy that they brought into Wiggins, a second-round pick, I believe. Like, they have done very well at identifying talent. How did you feel about how they approached the draft?
I think I'm a little lower on Mara than some, and I think he's the thing with their approach that I like. When you are the Thunder, you kind of have to nitpick them a little bit because it's like they've already won the championship, but it's like their flaws are so very clear. Like, why are you not attempting to address them? I liked what they did with Sorber last year, but I don't think Sorber single-handedly fixes a lot of their toughness issues, a lot of their like, let's go get an easy bucket issues. And maybe Mara does, but I do also worry that Mara is like kind of contact averse. He's out of shape. He's not like a great passer. And the defensive ceiling is really high, but the floor is also really low because he's kind of out of shape and because he's not like fully conditioned. And I do worry that it'll be kind of more of the same, where it's like, oh, don't worry, we're gonna go throw a Mara at Wemby, and then Wemby's gonna stuff him into the basket, like shove him into a trash can. At Sturts, I do really think like they need more half court creation, right? You always could use more half court creation, especially when you saw how thin it was with Jalen Williams getting hurt. Like, even if you worry about Sturts' defense, they found ways to make Jared McCain playable defensively. I think they can find a way to get Bennett Sturts to be. He's a legit half court creator. I think he can play on and off the ball. And you always need more guys like that, especially for the playoffs. And it's a good swing. And it really annoys me that the two great teams in the West are just getting so much better, and everyone else is just kind of waiting around.
You know what kills me is watching the Knicks turn their first-round pick into 5 first-rounders and then a 6th one tonight when they trade it back. And the Cavs go from Caravan, they get one. And now I understand to some degree. 29 is deeper than where the Knicks were. So for Cavs fans, what I would say is this. This is me venting. I also do understand to a certain extent. Everybody knew with the second apron issues that the Cavs wanted to trade out of the first round. So I don't think they had many teams over a barrel. How did you feel about Caravan as a prospect? Do you think anybody that went between where the Cavs picked and where they traded out of, which consisted of, Caravan went, Koa Pete went, then you had Bruce Thornton, Richie Saunders, Isaiah Evans. Did any of those guys entice you as prospects? Were you in love with any of them, or are they all kind of in the same realm of, I feel about the same about Meleek Thomas as prospects as I do about those guys?
I had Isaiah Evans as a lottery guy, as my last lottery talent. I think he is incredibly athletic, and I think he is a almost as high of a level shooter as a guy like Meleek. I was like pissed off actively that the Rockets traded up and then didn't draft him.
Is that what you thought was coming? Because I saw Kelly Eco, they tipped the pick beforehand, but when you saw the trade, was that your initial inkling was, okay, they're going to get Evans?
That was my thought. Like, this team needs shooters so badly. They're kind of under athletic now after trading for Kevin Durant, and nobody plays good defense on this team anymore. And it's like, oh, let's go get a 6'7" guy who can fly around the court and use his length to create stuff and go out and play in transition. It's like, no, let's go get a 6'2" linebacker.
Most efficient basketball player I saw. I saw a lot of talk. Yeah. So what is the reservations? This is Ohio State fans, put on your earmuffs, because this is the part where Cooper tells us why he's not optimistic about the Bruce Thornton draft choice.
I like Bruce Thornton. I think he's good. I think Bryce and I said in the pod, he's going to be a EuroLeague MVP one day, right? Like, he's a talent. He's very good. The thing that he's really good at is scoring the basketball. He has to have the ball in his hands. He's not good enough to be an NBA go-to scorer. Maybe off the bench, but can your go-to scorer be 6'2" and do nothing else in the NBA today? Not in the playoffs, right? Like, you can't do it. You have to be Jalen Brunson good. And for all the talks of Bruce Thornton, oh, his stats profile is so similar to Jalen Brunson, he's just not. Like, nobody's Jalen Brunson. We need to. This is going to be a new, like, oh, he's the next Giannis. Oh, he's the next KD. Except now it's about old guys who are kind of short, and it's, oh, they're the next Jalen Brunson. And it's like, let's get a grip here.
Point guards are all Jalen Brunson. Well, who would have been the point guard if there was a point guard in the second round? Because that was my thought when I saw the trade. I'm not deep into Rockets coverage. But I didn't think about Evans, because my thought was, okay, given what happened with Fred VanVleet and the talk about needing a secondary creator, I figured point guard was something they would probably try to address, just to give somebody, an alternative to what you were trotting out there last year. Was there anyone in that range who you would have been like, okay, it's not Evans, but this is a much better system fit as a point guard for Houston?
Yeah, I thought Braden Smith out of Purdue, like he's tough, right? If there's a bet to be the next Fred VanVleet, if I've ever seen one, it's Braden Smith. He gets out there. He's not a good defender, but he competes. He shoots. He's a great passer. He's got like some fun stuff as like a short shot shooter around the rim. Like you just kind of need tough players, right? I thought it was going to be Evans or Braden Smith, but hopefully this is a sign that the Rockets are really invested in Tristan Newton, I guess, that they have Bruce Thornton now. But yeah, he's the only point guard who I would have felt really good about them drafting there in that slot.
I have an update, Cooper. We have now progressed in the picks, and Nick Martinelli is a pick that was traded from your Rockets to the Clippers, is also apparently going to the Clippers. Now, I don't know what's moved around. Don't take this with a grain of salt. Maybe Vesar isn't even going to end up on the Clippers. I don't know. But this is multiple big men now and Darius Garland who have all departed. Now, let's talk a little bit about favorite guys in the draft, because rather than dwell on the second round guys, I want to get a sense of who were your darlings in this draft? Who were your favorite prospects? Because you talked one thing I want to hit before we get that is you mentioned OKC and the Jared McCain trade. Now, at the time, Daryl Morey made that comment about feeling like they sold high. And then Phylon ends up sliding all the way down to Philly. That was a guy who I saw mocked much higher than that. And during the coverage of the first round, there was a lot of people talking about, well, look at this guy. He's falling. This is way lower than we expected. How did you feel about him as a prospect relative to the other point guards that were out there?
I had Phylon at 5 on my board. I'm very, very high on him. Pretty young for a sophomore. I think he got a lot better year 1 to year 2. He's kind of this classical like swing at a sophomore. Averaged like 20-something points, played in an up-tempo scheme, like really facilitated for Alabama. He can really handle. He's super funky. Like he's just really unique, right? And I think you have to kind of weigh against like, oh, is he just so cool that I like him so much? But it's also like in the NBA, the most unique players tend to succeed over the guys who just kind of do the same thing over and over again. The stars are the most unique players in the league. And I do think that stardom is made out of individuality, and Phylon is a one of one. I think he's the best ball handler in the class. I think he's one of the best shooters. I think he's one of the best shot creators. Great get by Philly. Like, it's really funny that they traded Jared McCain and then he proceeds to go to the Thunder and be awesome. And, everyone's dunking on Daryl Morey. And I was doing it too because I think Daryl Morey's a dork. But then to go and get Phylon with the pick you got is like, I think you won. I think you won.
Well, Mike Gansey, now that he's over there in Philly, that's a departure that a lot of Cavs fans are. I'm a bit nervous because they've done so well with minimal assets in the development area, and you never know who to truly attribute that to. But I think the general consensus amongst Cleveland fans is, well, Gansey is the guy responsible for the Sam Merrill reclamation, for Craig Porter Jr., for Dean Wade, and for him to go into Philadelphia and grab him. It certainly seems like a good start to his tenure with the Sixers. Now, you mentioned Phylon was 5th on your board. Can you kind of give me the surprising guys who went against the consensus that you were much higher on?
Yeah, I think it's not surprising, but I had Cam Boozer at 1. I think Cam Boozer was by far the best player in the class. I think he's a better prospect than Cooper Flagg. Like he's a one of one prospect, very nearly like got that generational tag for me. Really, really loved him. Ibuka Corey, I had him at 6.
I don't like that. I don't like what I'm hearing there because he ended up with the Pistons. I was about to ask you to sell me on his negative and why he's absolutely most certainly going to fail. So I don't like what I'm hearing there. Tell me why you were so high on him, and then I want you to soften that by telling me under what avenue you think he could fail.
He can really handle the ball and get to the rim, right? Like he can really dribble. He's a good shot creator. You've seen like the Kemba comps because they're both kind of short, but he's slightly different. But he's got a little bit of that like, newer Isaiah Thomas. Like I'm just going to get to the rim and I'm more athletic than you and you can't really do anything about it. And then he can also shoot a little bit. He's got some fun shot creation. the worry is that he's short and he's not a good finisher, right? Like he can get to the rim and he can make all the passes and he can do all the stuff you want an undersized point guard to do. But then if he can't make the layups at a good enough rate and the shot just like maybe he goes a little cold, then he's out of the league, right? Like the margins are so small for a guy that small that he has to hit big early to like really return any value there.
Okay, so he was up there for you. You said he was 6 on yours, and Phylon was
Yeah.
5. Who else was above consensus for you?
I had Yaxel at 9. I don't know if that's that crazy. I had Merez Johnson
to be a bit of a darling. I feel like when we come to these mock drafts now, at least over the last several years, these guys who are kind of good across a multitude of areas tend to rise. And to see a stat like Yaxel is older than Kuminga, which is just blows my mind. But people don't seem to care about that simply because he's just so, multifaceted. Yeah, that one I don't find as shocking. I will say I find the Okore and the Phylon one more surprising. Anybody else in the top, 15, 20 guys who were, I guess, surprising to those people who were invested in this whole mock draft process, names that you wouldn't have expected?
I was kind of chalk this year. I was a bit lame for myself. A few years ago, I'd be making fun of myself.
Don't you do that. Don't you do that, Cooper. Because like I said, I kid you not, Cavs fans, you should check out the Upside Swings YouTube channel because, I consume all the stuff. I see the No Ceilings guys. I've Sam Vecini, all the guys who do a lot of draft coverage. I listen to almost every one of your podcasts because I do feel like I said, I do feel extremely confident that the three of you guys are, you're doing your own work. You're making your own opinions because it's far too easy in this world we live in to just be like, oh, this is his comp. You know how many times I've seen Meleek Thomas, Malik Beasley. This is going to be, and it's easy to just, that's a helpful tool. Don't get me wrong. Like I like trying to somebody to put me in the ballpark, but I saw somebody parallel Vesar to both Kelly Olynyk and Walker Kessler. And I'm like, those are two completely different players. Like, what are we doing here? I need you to narrow it down for me. So I like to consume as much of it as possible, but I thoroughly enjoyed everything that you guys did this season. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you a little bit about the James Harden experience in Cleveland. What were your thoughts at the time of the trade? Can you take me back to the Garland-Harden trade and tell me what you thought in the moment and what you think now in the aftermath of this half-season experiment we have thus far?
I will say, as someone who I watched the Cavs as like a secondary team just because I really like Donovan Mitchell. I was a huge Evan Mobley fan. I still am kind of low-key pissed off that he's not a Rocket, so and I'm a Jared Allen enjoyer, of course, but I always keep my eye on you guys. I'm watching everything, and it as much as I like Darius Garland, he's just struggled to stay healthy. And say what you will about Harden, say all the things you will, he is on the floor, right? He will get on the floor. And even if you worry about like the choke, the playoff stuff, it's like you have one of the best playoff performers in the world in Donovan Mitchell, who he's clutch. He can get out there, put up shots. He can, close out games for you. He can, maybe get James to kind of set the floor for him a little more, take some of that pressure off of him and at least be out there and support him. And I thought that aspect of the trade was really important. Even if in a vacuum, Garland is a better fit and a better player next to Donovan Mitchell, he's just not out there.
Yeah, I think my frustration was this. I actually thought rounds 1 and 2 with Harden, you were getting exactly what you wanted. I think the issue this playoffs is that Donovan had one of his worst playoff runs of his professional career. We had just taken it for granted after these last several years that Donovan Mitchell was just going to night in and night out drag you over the finish line, give you these 40, 50-point efforts. And then we get to this playoff run, and I thought Harden was perhaps the best player in the first round. Either him or Mobley versus Toronto was probably the best player. I thought he was very solid outside of one game in Detroit that he was just abysmal. But in the Eastern Conference Finals, I thought he really struggled. And, the team as a whole didn't play great, but he especially struggled there, which I think set the tone for an offseason where Now, a lot of pressure is on him in terms of there is very little optionality with the Cavs coming into the draft. They had just 1 second-round pick, and that was 2033. They've acquired one more in trading back, but their cupboards are bare. They're still in the second apron. The only way they conceivably can probably get out of the second apron is to let one or both of Keon and Dean Wade walk, and then for Harden to opt out and take a significant reduction in pay. And that's kind of what I wanted to ask your sentiments on, because that is the reporting around Cleveland, is that they expect that he'll get more years at less money. What is the figure in your view where you're like, okay, this is how much money worth you can justify paying James Harden in this CBA environment, especially on a Cavs team? Is there a dollar figure at which point you would say, despite the struggles in the postseason, if James Harden is willing to play for the next 2 years, 3 years at this average annual value, that is a win for the Cavs and James Harden, a mutually beneficial, compromise? Have you looked at all at because I can tell you the cap figures, which is essentially, I think Cavs fans, Bobby Marks had an article that said 2 for 56, so 28 million, which seems aggressive to me. I would have been surprised if he came in under 35, but now I kind of feel like 30 to 32 is that sweet spot where, okay, it'll get you under the second apron, and who knows, depending on the market for a Dean Wade, maybe you can even figure out a way to keep him in the fold. Is there a number that you would say, okay, this absolutely makes sense for the Cavs, and I think this would be a good compromise for both sides?
I mean, if he makes less than Drew Holiday and Jeremy Grant at like 32 million, like I think he's better and more valuable at this point in his career than those guys. Obviously you don't want to think about it purely in terms of like relative, but like he gets Tyler Hero money, $31 million. I'd rather have James Harden than Tyler Hero.
Like, I would agree.
Pretty clearly, right?
Speaking of that, how did you feel about that trade, the Miami and Milwaukee trade? I haven't got a chance to talk about it on the podcast yet, but who do you think won that, and what was your general assessment of the deal and the Boston element of it?
I think it's really funny that Boston got hosed. I always think it's really funny when teams refuse to trade bad players and then don't get to make a trade. Like Hugo Gonzalez is going to be out of the league in 2 seasons. Like, what are you doing? I like Hugo, like he's cool, but like he's not good. And Baylor Shireman, Shireman's coming back.
I like Shireman, kind of. I'm actually sort of a fan of Shireman this past season. I expected nothing after his rookie year, and then to see what he did. I mean, he lit us up in the way where it's like, if a guy can shoot and rebound from a perimeter position, then you'll have a fan in me. But I also think there's some smoke and mirrors there in the Boston system where I don't fully trust. After we got that goddamn lemon, Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder, I don't want anything to do with it. And that first, I'll say I want to get around to the Jaylen Brown thing, because that's the big news in the Cavs circles today. But to speak to that trade, I thought, I'm in group chats with Boston Celtics fans. I'm not in a group chat with any Miami Heat fans. My feeling was that the Bucks did way better than I expected, because in this post-lottery reform era where the odds are flattened out and these mid-range picks have a lot, I was asking myself before this trade happened, okay, would a trade like the Donovan Mitchell one even happen anymore, where they send 3 picks and 2 swaps, when conceivably even middle of the round picks have so much more potential to actually land in the top of the lottery now? And so for Miami to effectively have the only team bidding against them is Jaylen Brown, who in my view didn't make sense for Milwaukee anyway. You're taking a shittier player than Giannis, who's not going to lead you anywhere, who's the 7th highest paid player in the NBA, versus, okay, Miami felt like they were bidding against themselves to some extent. And I understand Tyler Hero's not some flawless player, but he's from there. You needed somebody to fill the money. Ware's on a rookie contract. I think he's probably the most promising prospect. Same thing with Jaquez. He's on a rookie contract. That's reasonable value. And then you get a guy who's only played a year in the league, shot over 40% from 3, and was, a top 10 pick a year ago. And on top of that, you get 3 first-round picks and a swap. That, to me, is a king's ransom, given the circumstances that Giannis was essentially dictating exactly where he wanted to go to and had walkability. To be able to extract all of that out of Miami, I'm not saying that I think that Milwaukee is going anywhere with the people that they have, but I think that's a much better package to set themselves up for the next era than anything they would. If they got the 27th pick, if they got the Celtics pick that ended up being Sanek and alongside Jaylen Brown, I don't think that's taken them anywhere. And I don't think that's what I'd want to do if I was the Bucks. So I saw a lot of, I saw Bill Simmons opining about, well, Hugo Gonzalez, we can't give him up. I think it's a no-brainer, though. I do think that devoid of hearing other options that the Bucks could have taken, I think that return gives me optimism as a Cavs fan that if at some point this marriage between Donovan Mitchell and the Cavs doesn't work out, that it makes me feel like, well, shit, if a guy in Giannis who's going to get 4 for 275 and is above the age of 30 and is coming off his most injured season in his career, if you can extract all that value for him, while I don't think Donovan Mitchell is a Giannis-level talent, he's still a top 10 player in the NBA. So it gives me hope. And I'm saying this in part because I'm trying to sell Cavs fans on the idea that if Donovan doesn't extend this summer, which by all accounts he probably won't, you should still feel incredibly confident and probably even better after the Giannis trade that the return may be better than you expect for a player of that level. Now, secondarily to that, I wanted to touch on the Jaylen Brown thing because I'm sure you've probably seen these rumors. And after you shop a guy in the Kevin Durant trade run up, and then you shop him again in this situation with Giannis, after the guy just carried your team for an entire season to a 2 seed in the absence of Tatum, he was a finals MVP. Do you think that relationship can be mended, or are you expecting Jaylen Brown to be elsewhere next season?
I mean, just the way he's talking, it's really hard to see that relationship being mended. Like, how often do you see a guy be like, wow, this year was my favorite year of basketball ever, and it's like the year he just got to fuck around and do whatever he wanted? I don't know. Sorry. I don't know if I can curse.
No, you can curse. That's totally fine.
Okay. I'm bad about it. But like, and not the year you won the championship and won finals MVP and like you were on top of the world, you were the best team in the NBA. Like, that wasn't your favorite season that you played. That's crazy. Like, and I know he's smart. He knows what he's doing. Like, he is playing the mind games here. I think the relationship's been over. And I think that the Celtics are also kind of like trying to wave him out the door a bit to be like, okay, you got to request the trade now. We don't want to be the bad guys for just like shipping you off for nothing.
I don't know why the Celtics should care about that, though. They literally, I mean, they shipped Pierce out. They shipped a broken down Isaiah Thomas out. That, like, this is not a team that's like, when you don't serve any use for them anymore, this is not a nostalgic, sentimental team. They do what's best for them, and they consistently do it. And so my feeling, I don't like Jaylen Brown that much as a person, if I'm being perfectly honest. Like, seeing him complain about the officiating. Joel Embiid's a massive flopper too, but Jaylen Brown is an off-arm push-off merchant, and to see him immediately after the season talking about conspiracies, just removed from when he was talking about Team USA, how shoe companies kept him out of the Olympics. It's just one thing after another with that guy, where I think Cavs fans are just so desperate. Like, I think the guy's a top 15 player, top 20 player, probably at worst in the NBA. And I know he had a top 5 MVP finish. So, leave me alone about that, Celtics fans. I just don't think when you look at that through the prism of, okay, would I swap him for Donovan Mitchell, knowing that he makes $7 million more? We're a team that's talking about we desperately need James Harden to take a pay cut to avoid the second apron. And there's people out there pushing the idea that Jaylen Brown for a Donovan Mitchell or Jaylen Brown for an Evan Mobley, when he makes $7 million more than both of those guys, who a lot of Cavs fans will tell me are already overpaid, or they're anxious about committing to the next extension for Donovan Mitchell. I don't know how you can sit there and sell me on the idea that, okay, for a trade to happen for a Jaylen Brown, you would in all likelihood also have to ship out one of Max Strus or Sam Merrill just to be cap compliant. Because keep in mind, the Cavs in the second apron can't trade a player who makes less than the player that they're bringing in. And the only way you can aggregate contracts is if you finish the deal below the second apron. So you, in a hypothetical, this is the thing, it doesn't get talked about in these rumors, the specifics, because it's boring as fuck. But if you're going to trade Evan Mobley for a Jaylen Brown, you're probably already having to ship Sam Merrill with him to get below the second apron just to make it legal. And that's all contingent on James Harden taking a massive pay reduction. So it is not an easy thing. And if you sit near, like, I don't begrudge anyone who would, if you, in a vacuum, if you'd say, I think Jaylen Brown's a better player than Donovan Mitchell because I think he's more two-way, maybe he's not the offensive player. Like, anyone who wants to have that opinion, I wouldn't push back on you super hard. I may not agree with you, but that's a fine opinion to have. But the reality is, do I think he makes enough of a difference that I would want to even thin out the depth more in Cleveland in order to bring him in? It's the same thing I was just saying in Milwaukee. I don't think you drop him in here in place of Evan Mobley or Donovan Mitchell, and that gets the Cavs over the top. And I don't think if you put him in Milwaukee for Giannis, you just took in a slightly worse player. He might be the best talent available to you in a trade market, but to me, it's the same way I kind of felt about the Garland Harden thing. Harden, his runway was way shorter. He was more available though. Do I think that it made the Cavs better in the short term? Yes. But do I think the gap between Garland and Harden was enough to propel the Cavs to a true title contender? No. And ultimately, that's the biggest issue I have with the trade in hindsight, is that he has no resale value at the age of 37. So if Harden alone isn't enough to push you over the edge when you're the only second apron team in the NBA, then your options are limited. So for the same people who were crushing Kobe for trading back, I want you to just consider we had 1 second-round pick. So for him to do what he did, there's no optionality in season if you're in the second apron and you have nothing to incentivize teams to take the bad assets on your squad. Like even a Dennis Schroeder, people talk about him as, well, we don't need his $14 million salary. I completely agree with you. But what do you think it's going to take to get a team to eat that $14 million salary? The Cavs don't have first-round picks to trade, and they had 1 second-round pick coming into tonight. So while I understand that there are Cavs fans who wish they had gone big, and I was in the same camp, what I will say about Meleek Thomas is I do like him as a prospect in a vacuum. I don't necessarily love him based on our roster construction, but my hope is that the rest of this offseason will bring us some shifting in those pieces. We don't even know who's going to be on the opening night roster. So there may be a world where Meleek's presence gives the front office a little bit more comfortable approach to shopping some of these guys above him on the pecking order in an effort to rebalance this roster to get some sort of either replacement for Dean Wade or other options in the front court alongside of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. And I know I took this far off the draft track. I'm just on a straight up rant at this point, Cooper. But the one last thing I want to do, I wanted you to plug your content yet again, because Cavs fans, this is the second time he's come on. He's coming off of a European trip. He was kind enough to carve out time for me. He has, if you're watching on video, he has the emptiest boards imaginable behind him. I don't know what those are for. I don't know what environment you're in, but it seems like you've already torn down all of the materials that was up there. You're on to the next draft cycle, perhaps. But if Cavs fans want to hear more in-depth coverage on not just Meleek Thomas, but any of the prospects we didn't take in order to make yourself feel better, where can they find that, Cooper?
You can find us on YouTube. That is where we do most of our stuff at Upside Swings on YouTube. You can find our Meleek Thomas scouting report. You can find every single, I think we did 40 or something scouting reports. We have live streams of the first 20 picks of the draft, of our own mock drafts. We had a lot of fun this season, and we're going to have a lot more off-season stuff coming to you guys this year. It'll be a lot more engaged of a cycle for us. We're very excited. You can also listen to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, really wherever you get your podcasts. And that's all I've got going on at the moment. As you can see, I've got my empty boards behind me. I've been too lazy to put up the proper decorations, in this room, but I'm very proud of our
You look like a presidential assassin who is, it's the day before it goes down. You're cleaning up the hotel room. You're going to burn all the evidence. And tomorrow I'm going to be seeing you on the news.
Yeah, that's what happens when the Rockets draft players I don't like. Okay, Raphael Stone, count your days. But no, this has really been great.
I know. I love doing this with you guys. I appreciate it. I was looking forward to it every year. We had to push it back a day because he was going to join me after the first round, and then much like my Bills with the Keon Coleman pick, I stayed up till midnight only to see them punt. I said, "Okay, can we push it a day?" And Cooper said, absolutely. And that's why I love him. So you can follow their work at Upside Swings, guys. And absolutely, you should do it. I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of the summer brings. I've got people on the ground in Arkansas that will be coming on the next pod who worked for, some of the people I work with in radio who work for the Arkansas Razorbacks now. So that will be the next guest. You can tune in for that. That'll be in the coming days. But Cooper, thank you so much for carving out time. For the Fear the Fro listeners, support them. Support me as well. If you like the content we're bringing you over the summer, the Bobby Marks podcast, the Rookie Scale, the John Chepkovich podcast, all these things, 5-star rating and review, because it compels me to keep going. I haven't monetized this shit. You're not getting pummeled with ads, none of that. So you can at least validate me with online button clicks. Okay. Till the next time, it's Fear the Fro. I'm Bob Schmidt. Thanks for listening.